There's no question, that without the Salvation Army, I certainly wouldn't be sitting in this chair today. I would be either dead or I would be in prison for the rest of my life. I got to University of Arizona and I started drinking and using marijuana when just right after my mother committed suicide. My earliest memories, of my mother is her teaching me the love of animals. We would go horseback riding. She grew up on a ranch and she loved dogs. We used to call her Dr. Doolittle. We thought that she could talk to the animals. She was my biggest supporter. She didn't like me playing football. She thought I was going to get hurt. She wasn't very supportive of football, but she was always supportive of me. There was no question in my mind that I had unconditional love from her 100% of the time. The phone rang and I knew that something horrible had happened to my mother. So my father fielded the phone call, told my stepmother, who came out into the hallway, where we met in the hallway because I'm trying to find out what's going on. And my stepmother, I remember her saying, "It's your mother." And I said, "I know."
It was a terrible thing to have to tell him. Jeff cried, but not long. Yeah, really not long.
My first tragedy really had come into my life. And if you look at a timeline, I never tied it together, but if you look at a timeline, my mother, takes her life, and then within weeks, I'm experimenting with alcohol and marijuana. And then that escalated with marijuana, mostly marijuana in college. And then once I got into the brokerage industry, it just escalated slowly, and I wouldn't say that I became addicted until I was into my mid to late 20s, and then it became a problem. And I went from functioning to non-functioning very quickly. And it wasn't long before I was living on the streets of Phoenix, living in a bush. And people always give me kind of the look of, and I'm like, hey, it was a nice bush. That was my bush. It was in a high demand area. Yeah, it's empty now. It has been cleared out, but they had a lot of big, tall bushes that were very similar to this right over here. So that's the size of the bushes here. I think they got rid of the bushes because it attracted the homeless to this area. It's a funny thing. If you have drugs, it's not bad to be homeless because you're medicating your surroundings and you're just medicating the horrific, experiences that you're putting yourself through. So if you don't have drugs, living in a bush really sucks. It's really a horrible place to be. This is an alley that I used to sleep in, and it's not unusual for most of the alleys that homeless people may live in. Since I was here, they've gotten rid of a lot of the vegetation because what I was looking for is an opportunity to be hidden, to not be seen. It is against the law to be homeless. If you fall asleep in a city park, then you can be arrested for that. So I was being arrested and released quite often. I was kind of a catch and release guy in the beginning. But one thing about addiction, and as you become more and more desperate, as your behavior becomes more and more and more desperate and escalating in the level of crime that you're doing. But one thing you learn in jail is you don't eat your grapefruit because it's your pillow on the floor. So I use that as a pillow. So that's where my addiction had really brought me, was using a grapefruit for a pillow, eating jail food and looking forward to it because I hadn't eaten in quite a while. You really don't, I think the feeling that you have is that you may not see freedom ever again. It may be that this is going to be what it's like for the rest of your life. You come in here, you don't know what you're being charged with for quite some time, and you might be coming into a situation where it may be years before you will have any sort of freedom from that point on. And it's just like a cell you would see in television. It's a small cell about as big as your bed. You have a little slot that you can receive your food through. And then a stainless steel bathroom in there. And that's your cell. And so I became very angry. And the judge was a very wise judge. Now, I had been arrested, 4, 5, 6 times by that time. And it was never addressed in the court system. My drug problem was never addressed. And so this judge looks at what they call your jacket, and he's looking at it and he's like, I think this kid's got a drug problem. See, I didn't have any drug charges, but everything I was doing was drug motivated. So he came up with a plan to divert me to long-term residential drug treatment and to release me, and to use his influence with the county prosecutor in such a fashion that they would not send me to prison if I did well in treatment. So kind of hanging this over my head. We're going to see how you do in treatment. So I was released and sentenced to the Salvation Army drug treatment program called Harbor Light.
Jeff was given a choice by the judge. It was either go to prison or go to the Salvation Army.
And he chose the Salvation Army, not knowing what he was getting himself into.
I met Jeff when he was sentenced and released into treatment from jail to intensive probation approximately 19 years ago.
He seemed to be more articulate, but he was messed up.
He was scared. He was very afraid that the battle that he was fighting with his addiction was going to win.
He did resist it.
During those days, it was very difficult for him. And in fact, having been a man of some means, to have to come to the Salvation Army, be assigned to wash dishes for everyone else on the program, that was a really difficult time for him.
It's almost like, these counselors are so patient because you're such an idiot. And you really are, you're just an idiot, and that you just close off. And the brain does that too, is that we close off things that to protect ourselves, from tragedies or from different trauma, especially as children.
But what it did for him is brought him some backbone. It caused him to think about his life. And as he worked through that time, he also had classes with us, and he began to learn about alcoholism, drug addiction. He began to learn about himself.
We were up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and we had to do chores. We had to make our beds. We couldn't be on our beds during the daytime. We had to go to groups. That was hard work, and I really want to emphasize how difficult it is. This is not an easy program. The Salvation Army has been doing this for a long time. They've been treating alcohol problems since 1865. They know what they're doing. Your entire person is treated. You have a physical person, a spiritual person, and an emotional person.
Whether or not he had the right to have a better life was a question for him. He didn't believe in himself at all. He was pretty well convinced that the things that had brought him to that place in his life had taken away his right to live well.
We said to him, we have real trust in you. We have real interest in your being successful and well. And he began to believe in himself. He began to believe that he could change.
He had an impact on the community within the treatment center, immediately started to identify ways where he could contribute to the treatment process, to the program, and specifically to the lives of the women and children that were in Harbor Light, in residence at Harbor Light. And he took his skills and turned that into a program that saved people's lives. And I think saved Jeff's life, quite honestly.
The longer that you're engaged in treatment, then the higher degree of success, and if you add to that Christ-centered treatment, then that even adds to that success. So the best model out there was also the only available bed to me, Salvation Army. And it changed and saved my life. 18 years ago, and I still can feel the emotion of just relief of walking into the doors of the Harbor Light facility. It's just God's property, and you just feel that same security and that you're loved and people don't judge you. And believe me, I was being judged by a lot of people at that time, because once again, how could you have done this to yourself? You had great successes, and how could you, be in the position that you're in? And they never asked me that. They said, the first day I was there, that we're going to love you until you learn to love yourself. And that's exactly what occurred.
We know we can't do it all, but we were able to do it with Jeff. And we just appreciate the opportunity to have done that.